The first time I saw Mason after our divorce, he was standing in the middle of the coffee shop, looking like a shadow of the man I once knew. His expensive suits and arrogant swagger had been replaced by wrinkled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. I almost didn't recognize him. My name is Lillian Mercer, and 1 year ago, I lost everything to a man who promised me forever but delivered betrayal instead. Lily, he said, his voice catching as our eyes met. Gone was the cold indifference from our last courthouse appearance. I didn't expect to see you here. I tightened my grip around my coffee cup, trying to maintain my composure. I work nearby now. His eyes widened slightly. You're working at Harrison Tech? I thought that I'd be broken forever? I finished for him, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Turns out I'm not as fragile as you believed, Mason. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. A year ago, he'd walked away with everything, our house, our savings, even my dignity. His high-powered attorney had made sure of that, painting me as the neglectful wife who had contributed nothing to our marriage. You look good, he finally said, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his own coffee cup. Thanks. I glanced at my watch. I should go. Deadline to meet. As I brushed past him, he grabbed my arm, his touch so familiar it sent an unwelcome shock through my system. Lily, wait. I pulled away. Don't. Whatever it is, I don't want to hear it. Please, he whispered, desperation creeping into his voice. I need your help. I laughed then, a brittle sound that turned heads in the quiet cafe. You need my help? That's rich, Mason. Really rich. His face crumpled, and for a split second, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse. But I'd been fooled by his performances before. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option, he continued, lowering his voice. It's about the Avalon Project files. The mention of those files, the very ones that had been the beginning of the end for us, made my blood run cold. No, I said firmly. Find someone else to manipulate. I walked away, heart hammering against my ribs, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. Once upon a time, I would have done anything for that man. I'd given him 10 years of my life, supported his career while putting mine on hold, only to be discarded when a younger, more ambitious woman caught his eye. The drive to my modest apartment was a blur of memories I'd fought hard to suppress. Meeting Mason at university. Our whirlwind romance. The small wedding that had made my heart feel too big for my chest. The years of building what I thought was an unshakable partnership. And then discovering the affair. The coldness in his eyes when I confronted him. The callous way he'd said, I think we both know this isn't working anymore, Lily. By the time the divorce was finalized, he'd somehow convinced the judge that I'd contributed nothing of value to our marriage. That the small tech startup I'd helped him build from our garage, the one that had consumed our lives for years, was solely his intellectual property. I'd walked away with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a heart that felt like it had been put through a shredder. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my parking spot. A text from an unknown number. Please, Lily. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow. 2 p.m. I deleted the message without responding and rested my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Whatever trouble Mason had gotten himself into, it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd spent the past year rebuilding my life piece by painful piece. I had a good job now. A small circle of supportive friends. A therapist who was helping me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. I was just starting to feel like myself again. I wouldn't let Mason pull me back into his orbit. But as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the nagging question refused to leave my mind. What could possibly make Mason Mercer, the man who had everything, look so utterly destroyed? And why, after everything he'd done, did a small part of me still care? The Avalon Project. The words haunted me as I tried to sleep that night, tossing and turning in sheets damp with sweat despite the cool autumn air drifting through my open window. 3 years ago, it had been Mason's obsession, a revolutionary security algorithm that would change the face of data protection forever. I'd spent countless nights at his side, debugging code, refining parameters, offering suggestions he'd incorporate without acknowledgement. "We're going to change the world, Lily," he'd said, eyes bright with ambition. "They'll remember our names for generations." Our names. As if we were a team. As if I mattered. But when Carson and Wade Technologies came calling with their millions, suddenly it became his project. His breakthrough. His ticket to the big leagues. And I became the supportive wife. The woman behind the scenes. Invisible. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another text. "I know you hate me, and you have every right. But innocent people will suffer if you don't help. Please, Lily." I threw the phone across the room, watching with grim satisfaction as it bounced off the pile of laundry I hadn't yet put away. Then I immediately felt childish for the outburst. "Get it together, Lillian," I muttered to the empty room. Morning came too soon, sunshine spilling across my bed with offensive cheerfulness. I dragged myself to the shower, letting hot water cascade over me as I tried to wash away the memories that Mason's reappearance had dredged up. At work, I moved through my tasks on autopilot, my mind elsewhere. Harrison Tech had been a lifeline when I'd needed it most. A mid-level position in their cybersecurity department had given me a chance to rebuild my professional identity separate from Mason's shadow. "Earth to Lillian," Rachel's voice broke through my thoughts as she waved a hand in front of my face. "You've been staring at that same line of code for 15 minutes. Lunch break?" Rachel Kim had been my first friend at Harrison Tech, taking me under her wing when I'd started 6 months ago. She'd never pressed for details about my past, but she'd been there with wine and chocolate on the nights when the pain became too much to bear alone. "Sorry," I said, pushing my chair back. "I'm a bit distracted today." "Clearly." She studied my face. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "I ran into my ex yesterday." Understanding dawned on her face. Rachel knew the broad strokes, that I'd been married, that the divorce had been ugly, that I'd lost nearly everything. But I'd never shared the details. Some wounds were still too raw to expose to the light. "The asshole ex?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, attempting a smile. "The one and only." "And?" "And nothing," I said too quickly. "Just threw me off balance, that's all." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. That was one of the things I loved about Rachel, she recognized boundaries. "Well, if you need to talk, or drink, or burn effigies, I'm your girl." I laughed despite myself. "Thanks. I might take you up on that." The rest of the workday crawled by. At 1:30, I found myself staring at my phone, Mason's request playing on a loop in my mind. "Meet me at Riverside Park. 2 p.m. I shouldn't go. I knew that. Nothing good could come from reopening those wounds. And yet. At 1:45, I found myself making excuses to Rachel about a doctor's appointment. At 1:55, I was walking across Riverside Park, my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets against the autumn chill. Mason was already there, sitting on a bench overlooking the river, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees. He looked up as I approached, relief washing over his features. "You came," he said, standing quickly. "Thank you." "I'm not promising anything," I said flatly. "You have 10 minutes to explain why I shouldn't turn around and walk away right now." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing. "The Avalon Project," he began, his voice low. "There's a flaw in the code." I blinked, taken aback. "What?" "A critical vulnerability. If exploited, it could compromise the data of millions of people, medical records, financial information, everything." "That's not possible," I countered immediately. You tested it exhaustively." "I know. But somewhere in the transition from prototype to production, something changed." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Carson and Wade are refusing to acknowledge it. They've too much invested to admit there's a problem now." I crossed my arms. "And this concerns me how, exactly?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. "Because you're the only one who understands the original architecture well enough to help me fix it." "The original architecture that you claimed full credit for?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "The one that made you rich while I walked away with nothing?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "I know I can never make that right. What I did to you was unforgivable. At least we agree on something." "Lily, please. I'm not asking for myself." He pulled out his phone, showing me an email. "Last week, I detected unusual activity in the system. Someone's testing the vulnerability, probing for ways in. If they succeed, the consequences will be catastrophic." I took the phone, scanning the technical details. If what he was saying was true, the situation was dire. "Why not go to the authorities?" I asked, handing the device back. "I tried." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out when you report your own company might be complicit in covering up a security flaw that could affect national infrastructure, people look at you like you're either crazy or a criminal." "And Carson and Wade?" "They've cut me out completely. Frozen my accounts, locked me out of the systems." He gestured to his disheveled appearance. "I'm persona non grata. They're claiming I'm having a breakdown." I studied him carefully. "Are you?" "No." His voice was firm. "I know what I saw, Lily. This is real, and we're running out of time." Part of me wanted to walk away, to tell him his problems weren't mine anymore. But another part, the part that had spent years immersed in the Avalon Code, recognized the gravity of what he was describing. Even if I wanted to help, what could I possibly do? I don't have access to the systems either. A flicker of something, hope, desperation, I couldn't tell, crossed his face. "You're at Harrison Tech now. They're one of Carson and Wade's biggest clients. They have access to parts of the system we could use to identify the exact vulnerability. You want me to use my new job to hack into my old code?" I stared at him incredulously. "Do you realize what you're asking? If I'm caught, I could go to prison. I'd lose everything. Again." "I know it's a lot to ask," he said quietly. "And I have no right to ask it of you, of all people. But Lily, there's no one else." The irony wasn't lost on me. Mason had walked away from our marriage with everything: money, status, recognition. And now he was back, having lost it all, needing the very person he'd discarded. "I need time to think," I said finally. This isn't just about you and me anymore. Relief washed over his features. That's all I'm asking. Here, he handed me a small drive. Everything I've found so far is on there. Review it and decide for yourself. I pocketed the drive, already questioning my sanity for even considering his request. I'll contact you, I said, turning to leave. Lily, he called after me. When I looked back, his face was etched with a regret I'd never seen before. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't respond. Some apologies came too late to matter. As I walked away, the weight of the drive in my pocket felt far heavier than its small size should allow. Once again, Mason had managed to disrupt the careful balance of my rebuilt life. Only this time, I was the one with all the power. And I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Back in my apartment, I stared at the small drive on my coffee table as if it might spontaneously combust. For 30 minutes, I'd been arguing with myself about whether to plug it in or throw it away. The problem with being a cybersecurity expert is that you know exactly how dangerous unknown drives can be. But the problem with being the ex-wife of a brilliant but flawed programmer is that your curiosity often overrides your caution. With a sigh, I booted up my secure sandbox environment, a virtual machine isolated from my main system where I could safely examine potentially risky code. The drive contained exactly what Mason had claimed: technical logs, system analyses, and a detailed report of the vulnerability he'd discovered. As I scrolled through the documents, my professional alarm bells began ringing louder. This wasn't just serious, it was potentially catastrophic. If exploited, the flaw would create a backdoor into the integrated systems of dozens of major institutions, hospitals, banks, government agencies. The kind of vulnerability that kept security experts up at night. The code looked familiar, yet not. I could see remnants of our original architecture, but it had been modified extensively, and not for the better. Someone had prioritized speed over security, cutting corners we had deliberately reinforced. My phone rang, startling me. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Hey, I answered, trying to sound normal. What's up? Just checking in, she said. You seemed off today. How was the doctor's appointment? I could hear the air quotes in her voice. I hesitated. Rachel was the closest thing I had to a best friend these days, but involving her in this mess felt wrong. It was fine, I lied. Just routine stuff. Her tone made it clear she wasn't buying it. And it has nothing to do with your ex suddenly appearing at Harrison Tech this afternoon, asking for you at reception? My blood froze. What? Yeah, security turned him away since he didn't have an appointment. Her voice softened. Lily, what's going on? Is he harassing you? No, it's not that, I said quickly. It's complicated. Complicated is my middle name. Well, actually it's Jean-A-E, but you get the point. She paused. Want me to come over? I've got wine and that disgustingly spicy Thai food you pretend not to love. Despite everything, I smiled. Maybe another night? I've got some things to work through. All right, but my offer stands. And Lily? Whatever's happening with your ex, be careful. Men like that don't change their spots. After we hung up, I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Mason coming to my workplace crossed a line. But was it desperation or manipulation? With him, it was always hard to tell. I turned back to the files, determined to finish my analysis before making any decisions. 3 hours later, my suspicions were confirmed. The vulnerability was real, and the threat was imminent. If Mason's logs were accurate, someone was already actively probing the system, looking for a way in. With a heavy sigh, I picked up my phone and texted the number Mason had used. "Don't come to my workplace again. Meet me tomorrow, same place, 7 a.m. And bring coffee. Strong." The response was immediate. "Thank you, Lily. I'll be there." I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. What was I getting myself into? And why couldn't I just walk away from Mason's problems like he'd walked away from our marriage? The answer came unbidden, because despite everything, I still believed in doing the right thing. And letting millions of innocent people's data be compromised because I couldn't separate my personal feelings from a legitimate crisis wasn't the right thing. But as I crawled into bed that night, another, more unsettling thought crept in. Part of me wanted to help because I needed Mason to see exactly what he'd thrown away. I wanted him to understand that the woman he'd dismissed as merely his supportive wife was actually the only person who could save him now. And that realization, that petty desire for recognition, bothered me almost as much as the security threat itself. "You look terrible," I said by way of greeting as I approached the bench where Mason waited, 2 coffee cups in hand. It wasn't just a dig, he genuinely looked worse than yesterday. The circles under his eyes had darkened, and his normally clean-shaven face sported stubble that aged him considerably. "Thanks," he said with a wan smile, offering me one of the cups. "Black, 2 sugars, still?" I nodded, slightly unsettled that he remembered such a small detail after everything. "I reviewed your files," I said, getting straight to business as I sat beside him. "The vulnerability is real. And yes, it appears someone is actively trying to exploit it." Relief washed over his features. "You believe me, then?" "I believe the evidence," I clarified. "But I still don't understand how this happened. The original architecture we designed specifically protected against this kind of breach." Mason's face darkened. "Carson and Wade. Once they acquired full rights, they started optimizing the code. Translation, cutting corners to get it to market faster. And you let them?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. He had the grace to look ashamed. By the time I realized what they were doing, the changes were already implemented. I tried to raise concerns, but he trailed off. "But your cushy executive position was more important," I finished. "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "I thought I could fix it from the inside. I was working on patches, but then I discovered someone was already exploiting the weakness. When I brought it to the board, they shut me down. Said it would create unnecessary market panic if word got out. So they buried it," I said, unsurprised. "And when you wouldn't let it go, they buried you too." He nodded, staring into his coffee. "They've frozen my accounts, locked me out of the systems, even evicted me from my apartment. The official story is that I'm having a mental breakdown due to personal issues. The divorce, I guessed. Among other things." He looked up at me, his expression pained. Turns out Vanessa wasn't quite who I thought she was either. Vanessa. The name of his assistant-turned-mistress still stung to hear, though not as sharply as it once had. "What happened?" I asked, not sure why I even cared. "She left," he said simply. "Once the money and status disappeared, so did she. Apparently, she found my replacement at Carson and Wade more appealing." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Karma's a bitch." He winced at my tone. "I deserve that." "Yes, you did." I sipped my coffee, letting the awkward silence stretch between us. "So what exactly are you proposing we do about the Avalon issue?" I can't just walk into Harrison Tech and start poking around in Carson and Wade's systems. No, but you have legitimate access to the client-side interface, he explained. If we can pinpoint exactly where the vulnerability lies using that, I can develop a patch. And then what? Carson and Wade made it clear they don't want to acknowledge the problem. We go public, he said firmly. Force their hand. I raised an eyebrow. That would tank their stock price. And yours. I don't care about the money anymore, Lily. His voice was soft, earnest. I just want to fix this before anyone gets hurt. I've already lost everything that matters. I can't have more blood on my hands. I searched his face for any sign of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to during our divorce. But all I saw was exhaustion and desperation. All right, I said finally. I'll help you identify the vulnerability. But that's it. After that, you're on your own. Relief washed over his features. Thank you, Lily. I know I don't deserve your help. No, you don't, I agreed, standing up. Meet me tonight at 7 Pines Cafe at 8. Bring everything you have. We'll need to work fast. As I walked away, I tried to ignore the small voice in my head questioning my decision. Was I doing this because it was the right thing to do? Or because part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, wanted to see Mason brought to his knees? The truth, I suspected, was somewhere in the messy middle. 7 Pines Cafe was the kind of place that attracted students and night owls, dimly lit, with free Wi-Fi and no questions asked about how long you occupied a table as long as you kept ordering. Perfect for what we needed to do. I arrived early, securing a corner booth away from prying eyes. Mason showed up precisely at 8, carrying a worn laptop bag and looking even more haggard than that morning. I ordered you a sandwich, I said as he slid into the booth across from me. You look like you haven't eaten in days. He seemed surprised by the gesture. Thanks. I haven't been thinking much about food lately. Well, you're no good to anyone if you collapse from hunger, I replied practically, pushing the plate toward him. Eat while I set up. As he devoured the sandwich, I established a secure connection to Harrison Tech Systems. What we were about to do wasn't exactly illegal. I had legitimate access to the client portal, but it certainly wouldn't win me Employee of the Month if discovered. Okay, I said once my preparations were complete. Walk me through exactly what you found. For the next hour, Mason explained in technical detail the anomalies he'd detected and the tests he'd run. As much as I hated to admit it, his analysis was brilliant. He'd always had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed. We worked side by side, falling into our old rhythm despite everything that had happened between us. It was strange how easily the muscle memory returned, the way we completed each other's technical thoughts, anticipated each other's questions. For a moment, I could almost forget the betrayal. Almost. There, I said finally, pointing to a section of code. That's it. They modified the authentication protocol to speed up processing, but in doing so, they created a loophole. Mason leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. I stiffened at the contact, and he quickly pulled back, mumbling an apology. You're right, he said, focusing on the screen. Classic case of prioritizing convenience over security. And look, he pulled up another window, showing a log of recent access attempts. Someone's specifically targeting that weakness. I frowned, scanning the log. These are sophisticated attacks. Not some random hacker. No, he agreed grimly. This is professional. Corporate espionage? Possibly. Or worse, nation-state actors. He ran a hand through his hair. This is exactly what I tried to warn Carson and Wade about. With access to this system, an attacker could potentially affect critical infrastructure. I sat back, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about Mason's reputation or my lingering resentment. Real lives could be at stake. So what's the fix? I asked. I've already started working on a patch. He opened another file on his laptop. But I need access to the full system to implement it, which I no longer have. And going to the authorities would take too long, he finished. By the time they cut through the red tape, it could be too late. I drummed my fingers on the table, thinking. There might be another way. Harrison Tech is hosting a security conference next week. Carson and Wade executives will be there, along with representatives from most of their major clients. A public forum, Mason said, understanding dawning on his face. If we presented the evidence there, they couldn't bury it, I finished. But we'd need irrefutable proof. And your reputation is in shambles, he acknowledged with a wry smile. Which is why it can't come from me. The implication hung in the air between us. You want me to present the findings, I said flatly. You're respected in the community. People will listen to you. And risk my career in the process? I shook my head. Mason, if I do this, Harrison Tech could fire me. Carson and Wade could sue me for defamation. I'd be back to square one. I know it's a lot to ask, he said quietly. But Lily, if we don't do this, people could die. I'm not being dramatic. The systems this code protects, hospitals, power grids, they're literal lifelines. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Let me think about it. We don't have much time, he urged. I said I'll think about it, I repeated more firmly. I need to consider all the angles. And verify your findings independently. He nodded, accepting my terms. Fair enough. As we packed up our equipment, Mason paused, his hands stilling over his laptop. For what it's worth, Lily, working with you again, it reminds me of how good we used to be together. I zipped my bag closed with more force than necessary. Don't what? Don't try to use nostalgia to manipulate me. We're working together out of necessity, not because I've forgiven you. He looked genuinely hurt. That's not what I meant. I need to go, I cut him off, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I'll contact you once I've verified the vulnerability and made my decision. Outside, the cool night air helped clear my head. Part of me, the part still raw from betrayal, wanted to walk away and let Mason face the consequences of his actions alone. But the evidence was compelling. The threat was real. And deep down, I knew I couldn't live with myself if people got hurt because I put my personal feelings above public safety. The question was, how far was I willing to go to fix a problem I hadn't created? And could I trust Mason enough to put my rebuilt life on the line once again? You've been distracted all week, Rachel observed as we sat in the Harrison Tech cafeteria, picking at our salads. Anything you want to talk about? I toyed with a cherry tomato, avoiding her gaze. The truth was, I'd spent every spare moment verifying Mason's claims and developing a contingency plan. The more I dug, the more convinced I became that the threat was imminent and catastrophic if realized. Just some personal stuff, I hedged. Personal stuff that has you looking over your shoulder and jumping every time your phone buzzes? She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Lily, I'm worried about you. Is your ex still bothering you? I sighed, setting down my fork. It's complicated, Rachel. Complicated is when you can't decide between pizza and Thai food. Whatever this is seems more like dangerous. She wasn't wrong. What Mason and I were planning could cost us both our careers, or worse, if Carson and Wade decided to press charges. I'm handling it, I assured her, mustering a smile. But thank you for caring. Before she could press further, my phone buzzed with a text. Mason. Need to see you. Urgent. 911. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Mason knew not to contact me during work hours unless it was an emergency. I need to take this, I said, standing abruptly. Rain check on lunch? Rachel's concern was palpable, but she nodded. Be careful, Lily. I hurried to the relative privacy of a nearby stairwell and called Mason. What's wrong? I demanded as soon as he picked up. They've accelerated the timeline, he said without preamble, his voice tense. I've been monitoring the attack patterns. They're no longer just probing, they're preparing for a full-scale breach. How soon? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Days. Maybe less. I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall for support. The security conference isn't until next week. We'd be too late. Exactly. His voice cracked slightly. Lily, we need a new plan. Meet me at my apartment after work, I said after a moment's consideration. We'll figure something out. As I hung up, the weight of the situation pressed down on me like a physical force. This was no longer about Mason and me, or even about Carson and Wade's reputation. Real lives were at stake. The rest of the workday passed in a blur. I maintained a facade of normalcy while my mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Mason was waiting outside my apartment building when I arrived, pacing nervously on the sidewalk. He looked worse than ever, unshaven, clothes rumpled, eyes wild with worry. Inside, I said curtly, leading him up to my small apartment. He followed without comment, though I caught him glancing around the modest space with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity? Guilt? It was a far cry from the luxury home we'd once shared. Show me what you found, I said, cutting to the chase as I booted up my laptop. He pulled out his own computer and walked me through the latest logs, pointing out the patterns that indicated an imminent attack. My stomach sank as I reviewed the data. He was right, we were running out of time. We need to go directly to the authorities, I said finally. FBI Cyber Division. They can force Carson and Wade to implement emergency measures. Mason shook his head. I tried that route already. Carson and Wade has too many connections. They convinced the FBI I was having a psychotic break, possibly even a disgruntled ex-employee turning into a threat actor myself. That's absurd. Is it? He laughed bitterly. Look at me, Lily. I haven't slept in days. I'm living out of my car because they froze my bank accounts. I probably do look like a madman. I studied him, seeing beyond the disheveled appearance to the desperation beneath. Okay, so the authorities are out. What about a direct approach to Harrison Tech? They have influence with Carson and Wade. Without concrete proof of an active threat, they'd just refer it back to Carson and Wade for verification. He rubbed his eyes. We need something definitive. Something they can't ignore or explain away. A dangerous idea began forming in my mind. What if we could show them exactly what the vulnerability looks like in action? Mason's head snapped up. You mean? Create a controlled demonstration, I clarified. Not an actual breach, but enough to prove the vulnerability exists and show the potential consequences. That's. He hesitated. Risky. Legally speaking. More risky than letting an actual attack happen? He considered this, then slowly nodded. It could work. But we'd need access to the Carson and Wade systems directly, I finished. Not just the client portal I have access to at Harrison. Lily, what you're suggesting is the only option we have left, I cut him off. Unless you have a better idea? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported me back to late nights in our home office, tackling seemingly impossible problems together. No, he admitted. But if we get caught? I know the risks. My voice was steady despite the fear churning in my gut. But I also know what's at stake if we do nothing. For a long moment, Mason just looked at me, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. You've changed, Lily. Yes, I agreed. I had to. We spent the next several hours developing a plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and possibly illegal, but it was also our only shot at preventing a catastrophe. As midnight approached, we'd hammered out the details as best we could. Mason gathered his things to leave, pausing at the door. Thank you, he said softly. For believing me. For helping despite everything. I crossed my arms. I'm not doing it for you. I know. A sad smile touched his lips. That's what makes you better than me. You always did the right thing because it was right, not because of what you might gain. The compliment caught me off guard. During our divorce, Mason had painted me as naive, unsophisticated in the cutthroat business world he inhabited. To hear him acknowledge my moral compass now felt strangely vindicating. Get some rest, I said, ignoring the flutter in my chest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. After he left, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or taken the first step toward redemption. For both our sakes, I hoped it was the latter. The Harrison Tech building loomed before us, its glass exterior reflecting the early morning sunlight. Mason and I sat in my car, parked across the street, going over our plan one last time. Once we're inside, we'll have approximately 20 minutes before the security protocols notice the intrusion, I remind. Mason nodded, his expression grave. And if we're caught? Then I take full responsibility, I said firmly. I'll say I coerced you into helping me. That's absurd, he protested. This was my career is already established at Harrison Tech, I cut him off. And unlike you, I have nothing left to lose. It wasn't entirely true, but it seemed to silence him. We entered the building separately, me through the main entrance using my access card, Mason through a service entrance I'd helped him bypass. 20 tense minutes later, we were huddled in a secure server room, working in tandem to expose the vulnerability without causing actual damage. There, I whispered as the final piece fell into place. Send it. Mason hesitated, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Lily, if this goes wrong. It won't, I assured him, though I felt anything but confident. He pressed enter, and we watched as our carefully crafted proof of concept demonstrated the catastrophic security flaw in real time. Alarms began to sound throughout the building. That's our cue to leave, I said, quickly wiping our digital footprints. We were nearly at the exit when security personnel surrounded us, their expressions grim. Among them stood the Harrison Tech CEO and Carson and Wade's chief security officer. What had you done? The CSO demanded, his face contorted with rage. I straightened my shoulders. Saved you from a disaster you were too stubborn to acknowledge. The next hours were a blur of interrogations and explanations. To my surprise, once the Harrison Tech technical team verified our findings, the executive's anger turned to grudging recognition. The vulnerability was real, and our demonstration had likely prevented a catastrophic breach. 6 months later, I sat across from Mason in the same coffee shop where we'd reconnected after our divorce. But everything was different now. Director of Cybersecurity, he said, raising his cup in a toast. Impressive. I shrugged. Harrison Tech knows talent when they see it. And Carson and Wade learned their lesson the hard way. I studied his face, healthier now, with clear eyes and a genuine smile. What about you? What's next? Starting over, he said simply. Building something new. Something honest this time. Good, I said, meaning it. We weren't friends, exactly. Too much had happened for that. But we'd found something better than the bitter enmity of our divorce, a mutual respect forged in crisis. Sometimes, it seems, you have to lose everything to discover what's truly valuable.